a dying horse, a child frozen to the saddle, and a woman who had every reason to keep her door shut. Clara Bellwether had already buried her husband, already buried her son. She was alone on a mountain with 3 days of firewood and 2 days of food, trapped in the worst blizzard Wyoming had seen in years. Then she heard it. A sound that would change everything. Not the horse. Something worse. A child's voice, barely a whisper, calling for a father who was face down in the snow, crawling blind, bleeding, holding a tiny coat he would never deliver. Clara had a choice. Open the door and risk dying the same way her husband did, or stay inside and let the silence win. She grabbed her dead husband's coat, a rifle, and a knife, and kicked that door wide open. What happened over the next 15 miles is a story of impossible strength, buried secrets, a 25,000-acre empire, and a little girl who hadn't spoken a single word in 22 months, until she whispered one name. Welcome to Cowboy Chronicles channel, where the dust never settles and the stories never fade. This is your home for tales of grit, love, and survival from the untamed West. If the frontier calls to your soul, you're in the right place. This story reminds us that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about opening the door when everything inside you says don't. And sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. If that intro gave you chills, wait until you hear the courtroom scene. Stay till the end. I promise it's worth it. And if stories like this hit you in the chest the way they hit me, go ahead and smash that like button. Drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Cowboy Chronicles so you never miss a ride. Now, let's get into it.
Clara Bellwether heard the bones snap before she heard the horse fall. The sound would change everything. But that night, standing in her cabin with a hammer in one hand and a cold biscuit in the other, it was just another terrible noise in a world full of them. She had been fixing the door hinge for the better part of an hour. The cold had warped the iron, and every time the wind hit the cabin broadside, the whole frame shuddered and the hinge pins slipped loose. 2 years of Wyoming winters alone had taught Clara that a door that would not latch was a door that would kill you. So she worked, hammer and iron and patience, same as always. The cabin smelled of pine tar and cold ash, and the faintest memory of cornmeal. On the table sat a bowl of mush divided into 2 portions. One she had eaten from, the other was dried out, crusted over, untouched. It had been sitting there since morning, the morning before that too, and the morning before that stretching back so far she had lost count. She did not think about why she still set that second bowl. She just did it the way she loaded the rifle by the door every night, or hung Henry's oilskin coat on the nail by the fireplace. Henry had been dead 2 years. The coat still hung there, too big for most women, but it fit Clara just right. Henry had been a blacksmith, broad and strong, and Clara was built the same way. Wide shoulders, thick arms, hands rough as saddle leather from years of swinging his hammer after he could no longer swing it himself. On the shelf above the bed sat a baby blanket folded small and tight, cedar-scented. She did not touch it. She did not need to. She knew it was there the way she knew her own heartbeat, constant and quiet and aching in a place no one else could see. The blizzard was in its second day. 2 days of nothing but wind and white, and the deep, swallowing silence of snow piling higher than a man's chest. Clara had firewood for 4 more days if she burned it careful. Food for maybe 2. She had survived worse. She told herself that every night, standing at the frosted window, staring into the white dark, she had survived worse. Then the sound came. Not a scream, not the sharp cry of a horse in pain, something worse, the wet, choking rattle of an animal whose lungs were filling with blood. Clara knew that sound the way a butcher knows a blade. She had killed enough livestock to tell the difference between hurting and dying. This horse was dying. She set down the hammer, stood still, listened. The second sound came through the wind like a knife through cloth. A child, trying to scream the word Papa, but producing nothing except ragged breath, torn apart by the storm. Not words, just air shaped like words, thin and desperate and almost gone. Clara looked at the door, looked at the rifle, looked at the fire burning low in the grate. The last time she had opened this door in a storm, Henry had walked out to check on a downed fence line. He kissed her on the forehead and said he would be back in an hour. He was not back in an hour. He was not back ever. They found him 3 days later, half a mile south, face down in the snow with 2 broken ribs he had not told her about and a punctured lung that killed him in his sleep. Clara was afraid. She stood there in the firelight with her heart hammering and her hands gripping the edge of the table, and she was afraid. Then the child's voice came again, fainter now. Clara grabbed Henry's coat off the nail, pulled it on without stopping, took the rifle in one hand and the belt knife in the other, and kicked open the door. The cold hit her like a wall of iron. Snow drove sideways, stinging, blinding, filling her nose and mouth. She pulled the coat collar up over her face and pushed into the storm. The snow was chest deep in places, packed and crusted on top but soft underneath, and every step punched through the surface and dropped her to her hips. She fought forward. 20 yards, 30. She found the horse first. It was down on its side, legs twisted at angles that made Clara's stomach turn. The left foreleg was broken clean through, bone jutting white through the skin, blood steaming in the snow. Compound fracture. The animal's chest was heaving in shallow, liquid gasps, foam frozen on its lips. Good horse, big, well-muscled. The saddle was expensive, leather-tooled with silver conchos that caught what little light the storm allowed. Not a drifter's animal, not by a long way. There was a child lashed to the saddle horn, not with rope, with leather straps. Proper rigging done by someone who knew what they were doing. Someone had tied this child to the saddle with care and with knowledge, expecting the horse to carry what the rider could not. The child was small, 7 years old, maybe less. A girl, wrapped in a coat 3 sizes too big. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. Her eyes were open but unfocused, glassy, staring at nothing. Her skin had gone the blue-white color that Clara knew meant they were running out of time. Clara cut the straps with her belt knife. The girl would not let go. Her fingers were locked around the saddle horn, frozen stiff, each tiny knuckle white as bone. Clara had to pry them loose one at a time, feeling the small, rigid fingers bend under her grip, feeling the ice in them, feeling how close to gone this child already was. She pulled the girl free and pressed her against her chest. The child weighed almost nothing. That was when she saw the man, 20 yards back, face down in the snow, not lying still, crawling, one hand clawing forward through the crust, slow and blind, the other hand clutching a small coat, a child's coat. He had stripped it off himself and was trying to deliver it to his daughter. Blood from his temple left a black trail behind him like ink on paper. His body had quit, but his hands had not gotten the message. Clara stood in the blizzard with a dying child against her chest, and a crawling man 20 yards behind her, and a cabin 40 yards ahead. She could not carry both. The child was in stage 2 hypothermia. Minutes mattered. If she set the girl down in the snow to go back for the man, the girl could die before Clara returned. If she took the girl first, the man could bleed out in the dark. Clara ran. She hit the cabin door with her shoulder, kicked it wide, laid the child on the bed. She stripped the frozen coat, the ice-stiff dress, the soaked stockings, wrapped the girl in every blanket she owned, shoved a heated stone from the fireplace against the small belly and tucked the edges tight. Then she went back out. The man had stopped crawling. Clara's stomach dropped through the floor of the earth. She threw herself forward through the snow, grabbed him under the arms and pulled. He was heavy, heavier than Henry, dead weight in deep snow. His hand was locked so tight around that little coat that she could not pry it free. She dragged him and the coat both, 30 yards through the blizzard, boots punching through crust, back screaming, lungs burning, teeth set against the cold and the weight, and the terrible possibility that she was dragging a dead man. She got him through the door, dropped him by the fire, rolled him over, checked his breathing. He was alive. His face was gray, his lips cracked. Blood had frozen dark along his temple where something had split the skin to the bone. But his chest rose and fell, and when she pressed 2 fingers to his neck, his pulse pushed back, weak but steady. Clara cleaned the wound, packed it, bound it with clean cloth. Then she sat back on the floor, chest heaving, sweat freezing on her neck, and looked at what the storm had dropped on her doorstep. A man. A child. Both half dead. 3 days of firewood and 2 days of food and 2 more mouths to feed. She peeled the child's coat from the man's frozen grip and turned out the pockets looking for identification. A folded paper fell out, small, blood-soaked, creased. She tossed it on the table next to Samuel's untouched bowl and went back to packing the wound on the stranger's skull. The paper was a deed of transfer for 25,000 acres of Wyoming territory. But Clara did not read it. Not yet. The child opened her eyes at dawn and looked at Clara the way a trapped coyote looks at the thing standing between it and the door. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Clara had seen that look before. In her own mirror, every morning, for 2 years. The girl's eyes were blue, sharp and wild and sweeping the dim cabin in quick jerks, looking for something, looking for someone. Her gaze found the man on the floor by the fireplace, bandaged, breathing, not moving. Her whole body went rigid. Her mouth opened wider. Her throat worked. Still nothing. Clara knew, not from books, not from any doctor's learning. She knew the way you know a horse is lame before it limps, the way you know rain is coming before the clouds show. This child had not stopped speaking because of the blizzard. This silence was old, worn smooth. A stone she had been carrying long before the storm. Clara did not push. She did not crouch down and say, "It is all right, sweetheart. You can talk to me." She did not make promises she could not keep or ask questions that had no answers. She had spent 2 years being the one who could not speak, who had no words for the hole in her chest where Samuel used to be. She knew what it felt like when people leaned in and expected you to perform your grief for them. She set a bowl of cornmeal mush on the table in front of the girl, set a second bowl across from it, sat down, picked up her spoon, started eating. Her bowl was empty. She was pretending. But the girl did not know that. The girl watched Clara's spoon rise and fall, watched her face for any sign of pressure or expectation or demand. Finding none, she looked at her own bowl, looked at the spoon, looked at Clara. Then she ate. They sat across from each other in the gray dawn light, the fire popping, the storm groaning against the walls, and they ate together in silence. It was the first honest thing that had passed between them. No words needed, just food and warmth and the quiet agreement that being alive was enough for right now. The man woke twice that day. The first time was brief. He surged up with a gasp, eyes wild, hands reaching for something that was not there. He grabbed Clara's wrist with a grip that would have bruised a smaller woman and pulled her close. His eyes were unfocused, fever bright, somewhere far away from this cabin. "Rosemary," he said, his voice cracked like dry wood. "Promise me. Promise me, Rosemary. Do not let Geneva take her." Clara did not know who Rosemary was, did not know who Geneva was, did not know what take her meant. The girl was sitting 3 feet away on the bed, watching her father mistake a stranger for her dead mother, and her small face showed nothing. Not surprise, not pain, just the flat, ancient patience of a child who had already seen the worst thing and learned that watching was safer than feeling. Clara wrapped her hand around the man's and held it firm. "I promise," she said. She did not know what she was promising. She said it anyway because he needed to hear it, and she needed to say it, and sometimes that is all a promise is. A bridge you build in the dark, not knowing what is on the other side. He let go, fell back, slept. The second time he woke was that evening. The storm was in its third day. Clara had spent the afternoon outside in the blizzard, salvaging timber from the collapsed cattle lean-to behind the cabin. Her hands were raw. Her shoulders ached. But she had enough wood for 2 more days, and that was enough for now. When she came back, the horse was worse. Jasper. She did not know his name yet, but she could see he was a good horse, strong-boned, well-kept. His broken leg had swollen grotesque overnight. The breathing was shallow and wet and coming in hitches that meant the lungs were filling. He was not going to make it. Clara stood over the animal in the snow and made her calculation. A gunshot in this terrain could trigger a slide from the ridge above the cabin. The snow up there was heavy and unstable, sitting on smooth granite, and a sharp sound could bring the whole face down on top of them. She could not risk the rifle. She drew her belt knife, knelt beside the horse, found the artery that ran along the inside of the jaw where Henry had shown her years ago when they had to put down the mule. One cut, quick and deep and clean. The horse shuddered once, a long rolling tremor that went from nose to tail, and then it went still. Clara cleaned the knife in the snow and stood up. Her hands were steady. They had been steady when she put down the mule, and when she butchered the chickens, and when she held Samuel for 6 hours after his breathing stopped. Her hands did not shake. They never had. Sometimes she wished they would. She turned toward the cabin and saw the girl standing at the window, watching, eyes blue and unblinking through the frost-smeared glass. She had seen everything, the knife, the cut, the blood, the stillness. Clara braced herself for tears, for horror, for the child to recoil from the woman who had just killed a horse with a belt knife in a blizzard. The cabin door opened. The girl walked out into the snow, barefoot, nightgown dragging. She crossed the distance between them without hesitation and took Clara's hand, the hand that still held the knife. She took it and held it, and did not let go, still silent, but holding tight. Something in this child had decided. Clara did not fully understand what, but she felt the small, cold fingers wrap around her own blood-warm ones, and she felt something crack open inside her chest that she had spent 2 years trying to keep shut. They went back inside. That evening, the man woke fully. His eyes found the girl first. She was sitting beside Clara on the floor by the fire, her head leaned against the stranger's shoulder, asleep. The firelight made shadows on their faces. The girl's hand was still curled around Clara's thumb. The man looked at Clara, not at her body, not at her size. His eyes went to her hands, the rough, scarred, calloused hands that were resting on his daughter's hair. Then to the forge tools on the wall, then to the thin stack of firewood, then to the single untouched bowl on the table that she kept setting out for no one. He read her the way you read country, looking at what was there, not what you expected to find. "Thank you," he said. His voice was wrecked, raw as an open wound. He did not ask her name, did not ask where he was. Just 2 words, and the way he said them made Clara believe he meant every letter. "You are welcome," she said. The girl stirred in her sleep, pressed closer to Clara's side. The man's eyes stayed on that. On his daughter leaning into a stranger's shoulder the way she had not leaned into anyone since they put her mother in the ground. His jaw clenched, his throat worked. He turned his face toward the fire so Clara would not see what was happening behind his eyes. But she saw it anyway. "Lottie," he said after a long while. His voice was barely a whisper. "Talk to me, baby. Say something. Anything." The girl opened her eyes, looked at her father. Her mouth opened. Her throat moved. No sound. The man closed his eyes and bit the inside of his cheek until blood beaded at the corner of his lips. Clara watched him bleed from his own teeth rather than let his daughter see him cry, and she thought, I know you. I do not know your name, but I know exactly who you are. On the table, the girl had been drawing with charcoal from the fire on the back of that blood-stained paper. 3 stick figures, one large, one medium, one small, standing in front of a house. Clara saw the drawing when she cleared the dishes. She did not see what was printed on the other side. The storm broke on the 4th morning, and Clara realized the blizzard was not the problem. The problem was that when it stopped, she had no reason to keep them. She woke to silence. Not the muffled roar she had lived with for 3 days, not the constant scream of wind against timber. Silence. Real silence. The kind that meant the world outside had stopped trying to kill them, at least for now. She crossed the cabin and scraped frost off the window with her thumbnail. White. Everything white. Snow had buried the world to its neck. Drifts climbed halfway up the cabin walls, but above it all the sky was clear, blue so sharp it hurt to look at. The girl was already awake, sitting on the bed watching Clara with those blue eyes that never missed a thing. She did not speak. She simply pointed at the window, then looked at her father, then looked at Clara. The meaning was clear. We are leaving. The man, West, was sitting up by the fire. He had pulled on his boots and his face was pale, his jaw set against pain he refused to name. He had been up and moving since before dawn, testing his balance, gripping the mantle to keep from swaying. The bandage on his head had bled through overnight, and Clara had changed it twice. "We need to move," he said. "My ranch is south, about 15 miles. 15. I have men who will come looking. If they ride into this snow without knowing where to search, they will die the same as we nearly did." Clara looked at him, looked at the girl, looked out the window at the white wilderness that stretched to the edge of the earth. "Jasper is dead," she said. She watched the words hit him. He had known, she could tell. He had seen the blood in the snow through the window, but hearing it said out loud was different. "Then we walk," West said. Clara did the arithmetic in her head. 15 miles. Waist-deep snow in places, chest-deep in drifts. One man with a cracked skull who could barely stand straight. One child with short legs and no winter gear that fit. Clara had snowshoes. Henry's snowshoes, built for a big man, which meant they fit her fine. She had a rifle, a canteen, and the last strip of dried venison she had been hiding at the back of the shelf. If they did not reach shelter before dark, all 3 of them would die. She did not say this out loud. She strapped on the snowshoes, wrapped the girl in every spare layer she could find, split the venison 3 ways, which meant nobody got enough to matter, and locked the cabin door. She slid the key into her coat pocket and did not let herself think about whether she would ever open that door again. "Lead the way," Wes said from behind her. He had the girl's hand in his. She had not let go of him since he stood up. Clara looked south, took a breath, started walking. The first 3 miles were the hardest thing Clara had done since burying Samuel. The snow was not powder. The cold had crusted the top layer hard enough to hold weight for half a second before it collapsed, dropping her through into soft powder underneath. Every step was a 2-part fight. Punch through the crust, haul her leg up and forward, punch through again. The snowshoes kept her from sinking to her waist, but every stride was still a battle against gravity and cold and the terrible weight of exhaustion that had been building since the first night. Sweat soaked her back and froze into a sheet of ice against her skin. Her thighs burned. Her lungs ached from drawing frozen air into warm tissue, the particular pain of winter breathing that felt like swallowing broken glass. She did not stop. Stopping meant freezing. That was the rule. You keep moving or you die. There was no third choice. Behind her, West walked in the trench she carved. The girl held his hand with one of hers and gripped Clara's belt with the other, shuffling through the packed snow in Clara's wake like a small ghost. Nobody talked. The cold was too deep, the work too hard. Clara focused on rhythm. Step, push, step, push. Find the hard pack under the powder. Watch for drifts that hid drop-offs. Keep moving. At mile 4, they hit the creek. The timber bridge over Sawbone Creek had collapsed under the weight of 3 days of snow. Clara stood at the edge and looked down. 20-foot drop to a frozen stream bed lined with rocks. The ice might hold weight, or it might not. There was no way to know without stepping onto it, and stepping onto it wrong meant a broken leg at the bottom of a ravine with no way to climb out. "We can cross the slope above the creek," West said. He pointed to the hillside that rose to their left, a long white face that curved above the ravine and connected to the far bank. It would save them 3 miles. Clara looked at the slope. Heavy snow sitting on smooth granite, angled at roughly 35 degrees, the kind of slope that avalanche men back east wrote papers about, and the kind that killed people out here every winter. The snow was not bonded to the rock underneath. One wrong step, one loud sound, and the whole face would come down like a white freight train. "No," Clara said. "We do not have 3 miles to spare," West said. His face was tight with pain and urgency. "If we detour, we will not make the ranch before dark." "I have buried enough people," Clara said. "We go around." West opened his mouth. Clara held his gaze. She did not argue. She did not explain. She just stood there in her dead husband's coat with her snowshoes strapped on and her rifle across her back and looked at him with the flat, immovable certainty of a woman who had lived on this mountain for 6 years and knew its moods the way she knew her own. West closed his mouth. They went around. The detour added nearly 3 miles in almost 2 hours. Clara broke trail the entire way, her body a plow, her shoulders the blade. The sun climbed higher and the snow blazed white and blinding. The girl squinted against the glare and pressed her face into West's coat. West walked with one hand on the girl and the other pressed against his temple where the bandage was turning pink again. Nobody spoke about the blood. At mile 7, the girl fell. Not a stumble, not a trip. She simply stopped walking, folded her knees, and lay down in the snow. On her back, eyes open, face to the sky. She was not unconscious. She had not fainted from cold or exhaustion. She had decided she was done. Clara had seen that look in cattle during the worst blizzards. The moment an animal stopped fighting and surrendered to the white. Once they went down with that look in their eyes, most of them never got back up. She knelt beside the girl. The blue eyes looked up at her, flat and empty and ancient. 7 years old and already acquainted with the particular despair of a body that has decided the fight is not worth the suffering. Clara did not pick her up, did not scoop her into her arms and carry her, did not whisper sweet words or make gentle promises. "If you lie here, I lie here," Clara said. Her voice was steady and plain. "All 3 of us lie here. Is that how you want this to go?" Long silence. The wind pushed snow across the surface in low white streams. The sun burned overhead. West stood 5 feet away, swaying, his face a mask of terror he was trying to hide from his daughter. The girl raised one small hand. Clara took it and pulled her up. No hug, no encouragement, just a hand pulling upward and feet moving forward. That was all. That was enough. They walked. Mile 8. Mile 9. Mile 10. The land tilted downward. Trees thickened. Clara found a frozen creek bed and followed it south. Easier walking here. The banks blocked the wind and the snow was not as deep. The girl walked between them now, one hand in West's, one hand gripping Clara's belt. She was shaking with cold and exhaustion, but she was upright, and she was moving, and that was all Clara could ask. At mile 11, West went down. He did not stumble or sway or give warning. One moment he was walking behind Clara. The next, he was face down in the snow with a sound like a feed sack dropped from a wagon bed. Hard. Final. Clara spun around and dropped to her knees beside him. She rolled him over, and the blood was immediate. The head wound had reopened. The bandage was soaked through, red against white. And when she peeled it back, she could see the wound itself, deep and angry, the edges swollen. His pupils were different sizes, left larger than right. His breathing was shallow and fast, and his skin had gone the gray color that meant his body was losing the argument with itself. The girl saw her father's face and made a sound. The first sound she had produced in 22 months. Not a word. Not a scream. A strangled animal keen, high and thin and terrible, the compressed noise of a terror so large it could not fit through her small throat in any recognizable shape. It was the sound of a creature who had already lost one parent and was watching the second one leave. Clara looked at the girl. Clara looked at the man, looked south toward where the ranch was supposed to be. 4 miles, maybe 5. She could not tell from here. She could leave west, pick up the girl, and run for the ranch, find help, bring them back. But that meant leaving a concussed man lying in the snow in December. And Clara knew what happened to concussed men in the snow in December. She had buried one. Or she could drag him. Dragging him would cut their speed in half. They might not reach the ranch before dark. And after dark in this country in this cold meant death for all 3 of them. Clara stood up. She unslung the rifle and set it down. She pulled off Henry's oilskin coat and laid it flat on the snow. She cut 2 pine branches from the nearest tree, each one thick as her forearm, and laid them parallel on the coat. She rolled west onto the makeshift travois, lashed the branches to the coat sleeves, and tied the whole thing together with the leather straps from her snowshoe bindings. She grabbed the ends of the pine branches in both hands, leaned forward, and pulled. West was heavy, heavier than anything she had ever dragged. The travois caught on every hump and drift, and every time it caught, her shoulders screamed and her back spasmed and her boots punched through the crust and she lost ground. But she reset, leaned forward, pulled again. The girl did not need to be told what to do. She walked behind Clara, gripping the back of Clara's dress, stepping in her tracks. Her small face was set and pale and determined. She did not make another sound. She just walked. 4 miles. 4 miles that took 4 hours. The sun dropped. The temperature dropped with it. Shadows stretched across the snow like dark hands reaching. Clara's legs went numb from the knees down somewhere around mile 13, and she stopped feeling them entirely by mile 14. She dragged the travois by memory and momentum. Her body on a track her mind had stopped being able to steer. She saw the lights when she had almost stopped believing in them. Not one light, dozens, spread across the landscape ahead like a fallen constellation. Too many lights for a homestead, too many for a small ranch. What Clara saw when the terrain opened up and the trees fell away was something she had no frame of reference for. A 2-story timber house with a stone foundation and glass windows that caught the last light of the dying sun. Behind it, a barn the size of a church. Beyond that, a bunkhouse, a smithy, storage buildings, corrals stretching in every direction. Cattle dotted the snow-covered pastures as far as she could see. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Clara stopped walking. She stood there on the ridge with a dead man's coat rigged into a sled behind her and a mute child clinging to her dress. And she stared at the empire spread out below her and could not make her brain accept what her eyes were showing her. West had said ranch. He had said it the way people say house or supper. Like it was ordinary, like it was something everybody had. This was not a ranch. This was a kingdom. Dogs started barking, then men's voices, sharp and urgent. Then a figure running from the barn, short and wiry with a gray beard, moving faster than a man with a limp should have been able to move. "Riders coming in," the figure bellowed. "South approach. Get your guns, lads." More men appeared. From the bunkhouse, from the barn, from every building and shadow. Cowboys with rifles, breath-making clouds, faces hard and ready. The gray, bearded man reached them first. He grabbed the travois and looked down at West's unconscious face, and something happened in his own face that Clara recognized. It was the expression of a man who had been holding himself together for days by sheer will and was now watching the last bolt come loose. "Boss," the man breathed. "Jesus Christ Almighty." "Boss." He looked up at Clara. A strange woman in torn clothes, hatless, coatless, raw hands gripping pine branches, legs shaking so bad she could barely stand. Behind her, a 7-year-old girl, silent and hollow-eyed and clinging to the stranger's dress, like it was the last solid thing in the world. "Who the hell are you?" the man said. Clara opened her mouth to answer. But the girl was faster, the child who had not spoken in 22 months, who had not made a word since they lowered her mother into red Wyoming dirt, opened her cracked lips and pushed out a single syllable. Hoarse, broken, barely louder than a breath, but clear enough that every man in the yard heard it. "Clara," the girl said, and held on tighter. Clara stayed one night, then two. On the third night, she caught herself folding the girl's laundry as if it were her job. She stopped and looked at the small dress in her hands and felt more frightened than she had crawling through any blizzard. The ranch was called the Double C. Clara learned that on the first morning when Bertie Hawkins, the round-faced woman who ran the house, sat her down in the kitchen and put a plate of eggs and salt pork in front of her and said, "Eat." Bertie was a big woman herself, soft where Clara was solid, but built the same way, and she did not ask Clara a single question until the plate was clean. The ranch employed 26 hands. It ran 4,000 head of cattle across 25,000 acres of Wyoming territory. The barn held 30 horses. The smithy had a forge and bellows that made Clara's chest ache with longing. And the house had glass windows and a cast-iron stove and a pantry stocked with enough food to feed a small army. Clara had been living on cornmeal and dried venison for 2 years. She did not let herself think about that. West was recovering. The doctor from Ridgewood had ridden out on the second day, a thin man with steady hands who cleaned and restitched the head wound and pronounced that Mr. Calloway had a grade 3 concussion and cracked ribs and was lucky to be alive. West took the diagnosis the way he took everything, with a clenched jaw and a nod and an immediate attempt to get out of bed and get back to work. Clara told him to lie down. He did not lie down. She told him again. He argued. She picked up the water pitcher from the nightstand and held it over his head and said, "I will pour this on you. And then I will walk back to my cabin and you can explain to your daughter why the woman who carried you 15 miles just left." He lay down. The girl, Lottie, was the reason Clara stayed. Not West, not the ranch, not the warm bed or the food or the forge she could see from the kitchen window. Lottie. The child would only speak to Clara. Not to Bertie, who had known her since birth. Not to Gus McAllister, the gray-bearded Scotsman who ran the ranch and who called her lass with a tenderness that cracked his gruff voice in half. Not to her father, only Clara. Only. And even then, only sometimes. One word at a time, pulled from somewhere deep inside her like drawing water from a well that had nearly gone dry. Clara. Hungry. Cold. Papa. Each word cost the girl something visible. Her face would tighten, her throat would work, and then the word would come, thin and careful, and afterward Lottie would go quiet again for hours. Clara did not push. She sat with Lottie in the study while West worked at his desk. She sat with Lottie in the kitchen while Bertie cooked. She sat with Lottie on the porch in the thin winter sunshine, and let the silence be what it was. Not empty, full of all the things neither of them knew how to say yet. But it was hard. Every time Lottie's small hand found hers, Clara felt Samuel. Every time the girl leaned into her side, Clara remembered the weight of her son against her shoulder, warm and alive, and then not alive, and the terrible morning she had to put him down because holding him meant believing he was still there, and he was not. Loving another child felt like treason, like standing at Samuel's grave and saying, "You were not enough. I needed more." Clara wore Henry's coat everywhere. She slept in it, worked in it, sat at the dinner table in it, while Bertie looked at her with soft, knowing eyes and said nothing. The coat was her armor, the last wall between Clara Bellwether, the widow on the mountain, and whatever she was becoming in this house full of strangers who were starting to feel less strange every day. On the fourth evening, after Lottie was asleep and the house had gone quiet, West found Clara in the kitchen. She was washing dishes because her hands needed something to do, and because the rhythm of soap and water was the closest thing to peace she could find. He leaned against the door frame. His color was better. The bandage on his head was smaller, but his eyes were heavy with something besides pain. "You need to know some things," he said. Clara kept washing. I am listening." He told her about Rosemary, his wife, small and gentle. Loved everybody, even the people who did not deserve it. Died in childbirth on the ranch, 3 hours from the nearest doctor. The baby died too. Only Lottie survived. And what survived was a girl who had watched her mother bleed out on a bed in the next room and had not spoken a word since. He told her about Geneva Tate Hargrove, Rosemary's older sister, married to a man named Hargrove who had money and power and opinions about everything. Geneva had filed a petition with the territorial court for custody of Lottie. She claimed West was unfit. She claimed the ranch was dangerous. She claimed a girl needed a proper woman's influence, and she meant herself. He told her about the hearing, scheduled for 10 days from now in Ridgewood. A judge would decide whether Lottie stayed with her father or went to live with an aunt she barely knew in a house she had never visited. He did not tell her about the 25,000 acres. He did not tell her about the 4,000 head of cattle or the timber rights or the railroad shares. He said my ranch the way people say my hat, like it was just a thing he owned. Clara heard everything he said. She also heard what he did not say. When he mentioned Rosemary, his voice went rough and thin. When he mentioned Geneva, it went flat and hard. When he mentioned Lottie, it broke. She set down the dish she was holding. "What does Lottie want?" she asked. "She wants her mama. She cannot have that. So she wants to stay here, with me, with the horses and the dogs and the people who have known her since she was born." He paused. "She wants home. Then fight for it. I am fighting. I have been fighting for a year. But Geneva has money and lawyers and a husband who plays cards with every judge in the territory." Clara dried her hands on the dish towel. "You have something she does not." "What?" "A daughter who rode through a blizzard to save your life. A girl who has not spoken in 22 months, but who looked at a stranger and said her name. That is not a broken family, Mr. Calloway. That is the strongest thing I have ever seen." West stared at her across the kitchen. The fire in the stove ticked and settled. Wind pressed against the windows. "Call me West," he said. "Go to sleep, West." He went. Clara stood alone in the kitchen with her hands gripping the edge of the basin and her heart doing something it had not done in 2 years. She ignored it. She was good at ignoring things. She had ignored hunger and cold and loneliness and the slow erosion of hope for 730 days. She could ignore this. Later that night, the girl crept into Clara's room, climbed into the bed without speaking, curled against Clara's side, small and warm, her head fitting into the hollow of Clara's shoulder. Then, in the dark, barely a whisper, "Miss Diana." Clara went still. She was here too. Before you. She said she would be the new mama. Then she took Papa's things and left. Clara lay in the dark with a child against her ribs, and a name she did not recognize turning slowly in her mind. Diana. Another woman. Before Clara. Someone who had stood in this house and made promises and broken them, and left a little girl with one more reason not to trust. Lottie's breathing slowed and deepened. She was asleep. Clara stared at the ceiling for a very long time. In the morning, she found the blood-stained paper on the table. Lottie's drawing had flipped over in the night, charcoal side down. The other side was printed in small, precise legal type. Deed of transfer. Calloway Land and Cattle Company. 25,000 acres. Recorded, Laramie County, Wyoming Territory. Clara read it again. Held it up to the window light, and read it a third time, very slowly, the way you read a letter from a doctor when you are afraid of what it might say. Then she folded the paper, slipped it into the breast pocket of Henry's coat, and walked downstairs with a face that could have been carved from the same stone as the mountains outside. Clara set the paper on the table in front of West and said one word. Explain. Not a question, a command. The kind of word that comes from a place below anger, where the bedrock is, where the things you will not bend on live. West looked at the deed and closed his eyes the way a man does when the bullet he has been expecting finally arrives. They were in the study. The door was shut. Through the wall, Clara could hear Bertie in the kitchen humming something low and Scottish that Gus had taught her. Through the window, she could see ranch hands moving in the yard, saddling horses, carrying feed, the world going on with its business, while hers tilted on its axis. "My husband hid a broken rib from me," Clara said. Her voice was level, controlled. The way iron is controlled when it is white-hot and being shaped. He said he was fine. He died 3 days later in his sleep because the rib punctured his lung, and he never said a word. She tapped the deed on the table. "You hid 25,000 acres and a cattle empire. Different scale. Same lie." West opened his eyes. He did not look away from her. He did not flinch or make excuses or put on the face she had seen men wear when they were caught and wanted to look sorry without actually being sorry. His expression was raw and open and tired in a way that had nothing to do with the concussion. "There was a woman," he said, "before you. Her name was Diana Welch." Clara waited. "After Rosemary died, I was alone with Lottie and a ranch to run, and a daughter who would not speak and grief so thick I could barely see through it. Diana came from Cheyenne. Her father was a merchant. She was warm and kind, and she was good with Lottie. Better than good. She remembered Rosemary's birthday. She brought flowers to the grave. She said all the right things to a man who was drowning and did not know it." He stopped. His hands were flat on the desk, the knuckles white. 4 months in, Gus found documents in her room. Financial records copied from my ledgers. Letters to a cattle buyer in Laramie offering inside information on my stock prices. And one letter to Geneva Tate Hargrove offering to testify that my household was unstable and my daughter was being neglected, in exchange for $5,000 and a percentage of whatever Geneva could extract from me in court. West's voice was flat now. The kind of flat that comes after you have been angry for so long the anger has burned itself out and left only ash. "Diana did not love me. She did not love Lottie. She loved what I was worth. And after her, I decided that nobody else would know what I was worth, because every time they find out, they change." Clara stood on the other side of the desk with Henry's coat buttoned to her throat and her arms crossed and her jaw set. She heard every word. She understood every word. She even believed every word. But understanding a lie is not the same as forgiving it. "I am not Diana Welch," Clara said. "I know that." "Then why did you hide it from me? You sat in my cabin for 3 days, eating my last food and burning my last firewood and watching me count strips of jerky like they were gold coins. And the whole time you were sitting on a fortune, because for 3 days, someone looked at me and saw a man, not a bank account, not a mark, not a business opportunity. Do you know how long it has been since that happened?" Clara stared at him. The anger was still there, hot and real and righteous. But it was fighting with something else now. Something that recognized the loneliness in his voice because she had heard it in her own. Every morning, alone in that cabin, talking to a dead boy's bowl. "I understand why you hid it," she said. "But if you keep comparing me to Diana Welch by hiding things from me, I will walk back to my cabin right now, 15 miles. I know the way." She turned and walked to the door. Her hand closed on the latch. She was not bluffing. She would leave. She had walked 15 miles through chest-deep snow, dragging a 200-pound man on a pine-branch travois. She could walk 15 miles home on a clear day without breaking stride. She would leave this house and this man and this child and go back to the mountain and the cabin and the bowl on the table and the grave on the hill and the silence that was killing her, but at least it was honest silence. Her hand tightened on the latch. "Diana never said Lottie's name," West said behind her. Clara stopped. "Not once in 4 months," he continued. "She learned it. She used it when she had to, but she never said it the way you say a person's name when you mean it, when it costs you something." His voice was quiet, rough. "Lottie said yours on the first day." Clara stood at the door with her hand on the latch and her heart slamming against her ribs. She did not turn around. She could feel the cold coming through the gaps in the doorframe, the outside air that smelled like snow and distance, and the mountain she had left behind. A sound on the stairs, small feet, quick and light. Lottie appeared at the bottom of the staircase, hair wild, sleep-creased, a charcoal drawing clutched in one hand. She looked at Clara by the door, looked at her father at the desk. She read the air between them the way she read everything, instantly and completely, with the sharp intelligence of a child who had learned that adults were unreliable and survival meant paying attention. She walked to Clara, took her hand, then walked Clara to the desk and took West's hand with her other. 3 people standing in a triangle, connected by a 7-year-old's grip. Lottie spoke, slow, effortful, each word pulled from somewhere deep, like drawing water from a stone well. Do not go. 2 words. The longest sentence she had managed since her mother died. The room was silent except for the fire in the stove and the wind outside, and the sound of a small girl breathing after the effort of saying 2 words that meant everything. Clara looked down at Lottie, at the charcoal-smudged fingers, at the drawing clutched against her chest, another picture Clara could not see yet, another piece of this child's inner world committed to paper, because her voice could not carry it. Clara knelt. She did not let go of Lottie's hand. "I am not staying for his money," she said. She said it to Lottie, not to West, because the girl was the one who needed to hear it. "I am not staying for him. I am staying for you. When the hearing is done, I go back to my cabin." Lottie looked at her with those blue eyes, clear and sharp and old. Then the girl put her arms around Clara's neck and held on. Clara stood up with Lottie's weight against her chest and turned to West. "I will stay until the hearing. After that, I go home." West nodded. His face was carefully controlled, but his eyes were not. His eyes were doing something Clara chose not to examine too closely. "Fair enough," he said. Clara carried Lottie out of the study and into the kitchen, where Bertie took one look at them and started making porridge without a word. That afternoon, a stranger appeared at the ranch gate. Not Geneva. A lean man with a narrow face and city clothes riding a rented horse that did not fit him. He stopped at the gate and asked directions to Elk Creek, his voice polite and easy and completely wrong for the territory. A town voice, an Eastern voice, the kind of voice that carried money or law or trouble. And out here, they were usually the same thing. But before he asked directions, his eyes moved, quick and practiced. They swept the main house, the barn, the corrals, the outbuildings. They counted fence posts and horses and hands. They inventoried the double C the way a man inventories a property he's being paid to evaluate. Then he smiled and asked his question and tipped his hat and rode away. Gus watched him go from the barn door, his arms crossed, his jaw working on a plug of tobacco. "Jack," he said to the young foreman, "follow him. Do not let him see you." Jack Mercer rode out. He came back 2 hours later with a name. Silas Drummond, former Pinkerton agent, currently employed by Mrs. Geneva Tate Hargrove of Ridgewood, Wyoming Territory. Clara was in the kitchen with Bertie when Gus delivered the news. She set down her coffee cup and looked at Gus and looked at West and said nothing. But her hand moved to the breast pocket of Henry's coat, where the deed was folded, and stayed there. The wolves were circling, and Clara Bellwether was standing in the middle of the yard with nothing but a dead man's coat and the kind of stubborn that does not know when to quit. Silas Drummond knew within 48 hours that Clara Bellwether had a dead son buried on a hillside, a dead husband buried beside him, and a 3-year-old debt at the Elk Creek General Store she would never be able to pay. Geneva Hargrove paid very well for information like that. He had ridden to Elk Creek on the pretense of buying supplies, and spent 2 hours in the general store talking to the proprietor, a thin-lipped man named Harkins, who kept meticulous records and bore grudges the way other men bore scars. Harkins told him about the widow on the mountain, the big woman with the forge. Husband dead, son dead, no money, no prospects, no visitors. She had an account at the store with 3 years of charges and not one payment. Harkins had written her off as a loss 2 winters ago. Drummond wrote it all down in his notebook in a cramped, precise hand. He also visited the church where Pastor Harlan told him about the boy's funeral. Small pine coffin. Clara had made it herself. carried it up the hill on her shoulder because there was nobody else to carry it, dug the grave herself, too, through frozen ground, with a pickaxe and a shovel, and the kind of determination that made the pastor uncomfortable to watch. Drummond rode to Ridgewood that same evening and presented his findings to Geneva Tate Hargrove in the parlor of her white-clappered house. Geneva sat at a mahogany desk. She was dressed in black, as she had been dressed in black since the day they put Rosemary in the ground. On the desk sat a framed daguerreotype of a young woman with soft features and a gentle smile. Rosemary, Geneva's younger sister. Dead at 26 from a birth that went wrong on a ranch 3 hours from the nearest doctor because a stubborn man loved his land more than his wife's life. Geneva read the report. Her face did not change. It never did. She had learned long ago that showing emotion was the same as showing weakness, and Geneva Tate Hargrove did not show weakness. Not when her father lost everything in the crash of '68. Not when she married Hargrove for his money and his name and his connections, because those were the tools a woman needed to survive in a world that did not give her any others. Not when they brought her Rosemary's body wrapped in a quilt, still warm, and told her the baby had died too. She set down the report and picked up the daguerreotype. Her fingers trembled. That was the only tell. The rest of her was ice. "I promised you," she said to the photograph. She said it the way some people say prayers, automatically, without hope, but also without the ability to stop. "I will not let your girl grow up without a mother." She turned to Drummond, who stood by the window with his hat in his hands and his face carefully blank. "The widow," Geneva said. "She has a dead child, a son, 4 years old. Diphtheria. And the doctor in Elk Creek advised her to seek treatment in Cheyenne. According to the store owner, yes, Dr. James Alderton told her to take the boy to Cheyenne. She did not go." "Why not?" Drummond hesitated. "From what I gather, she could not afford the journey." Geneva set down the photograph. She straightened the papers on her desk. She aligned the edges precisely, the way she aligned everything in her life, because order was control, and control was the only thing standing between her and the void. "Dig deeper," she said. "Find something the court can use. A debt, a scandal, a connection to Calloway's money. Anything that shows this woman is not what she appears. And if there is nothing to find?" Geneva looked at him with eyes that were pale blue and cold as creek ice. "Then make something. I will pay for whatever it costs." Drummond put on his hat. He did not ask questions about the morality of what he was being asked to do. He was a former Pinkerton. Morality was a luxury for people who did not work by the hour. After he left, Geneva sat alone in her parlor for a very long time. The fire burned low. The daguerreotype caught the light, and Rosemary's face glowed in the dimness, soft and sweet, and forever young. Geneva knew she was crossing a line. She could feel it under her feet, the precise place where righteous grief tipped into something darker. She had felt it when she hired Drummond. She felt it now, instructing him to fabricate what he could not discover. She was becoming the thing she despised, a liar, a manipulator, a person who used other people's pain as a weapon. But every time she hesitated, she looked at the photograph, and Rosemary looked back with those gentle eyes. And Geneva continued, because Rosemary had asked her. The last thing she ever said, bleeding on that bed, with the dead baby beside her and the midwife crying in the corner. "Take care of Lottie," she had whispered. "Promise me, Geneva. Promise me you will take care of my girl," Geneva had promised. And Geneva Tate Hargrove did not break promises, even if keeping them broke everything else. 3 days later, Clara was working the ranch forge when she saw him. West had offered her the smithy on her second day. She had refused payment but accepted the forge itself because a forge was not charity. A forge was a tool. And Clara Bellwether did not accept charity from anyone, least of all a man whose 25,000 acres she was still furious about. She was making horseshoe nails. Simple work, repetitive. The kind of task that let her hands move while her mind turned over the problem of Geneva Hargrove and what was coming. The fire was hot. The iron was good. and the rhythm of hammer on anvil was the closest thing Clara had to church. She felt the eyes before she saw them. Not West's, not Gus's, a different kind of watching. The cold, professional attention of someone who was being paid to observe. Clara had spent enough time alone in the wilderness to know when she was being watched by a predator. Wolves did it, mountain lions did it. And now a man in city clothes with field glasses was doing it from the tree line at the edge of the north pasture. Clara set down the hammer. She picked up a different one, the big forge hammer, the one with a 4-pound head that Henry had used for heavy work. She held it at her side, low and easy, the way you hold a thing you're very familiar with. She walked directly toward the tree line. The man lowered the field glasses. He was lean and narrow-faced, and his coat was too thin for Wyoming. He took a step back as Clara approached. She stopped at 10 feet. The forge hammer was still warm from the fire. Not glowing, but warm enough to feel. "State your business," Clara said. The man's smile was quick and practiced. "Just passing through, ma'am. Getting the lay of the land." "You have passed through 3 times in 2 days," Clara said. "I have seen you from the forge window each time. Next time I will not bring the hammer. I will bring the Winchester." The smile faded. Something else replaced it. Not fear exactly. Respect, maybe. Or the recalculation of a man who had underestimated what he was looking at. He tipped his hat and left. Clara watched him ride away. Then she walked back to the forge and picked up her hammer and went back to making nails and thought about all the different ways a person could be hunted. That evening she told West. He reacted the way she expected. Fury first, then the need to act, to send Gus in the hands, to find Drummond and run him off or worse. West was a man of action. When a fence broke, he fixed it. When a cow wandered, he brought it back. When a threat appeared, he met it head-on with the full weight of everything he had. Clara stopped him. "You chase one dog," she said. "Geneva sends 3 more. That is how people like her work. She does not do her own fighting. She pays other people to do it for her." West sat down. His jaw worked. The bruise on his temple had faded to yellow and green, but the anger in his eyes was fresh as a new wound. "There is something else," Clara said. She had not planned to tell him. She had planned to handle it herself, the way she handled everything, alone and without help, and without anyone seeing the parts of her that bled. But she was living in this man's house and eating his food and caring for his daughter, and she had told him 3 days ago that she would not tolerate lies. So she told the truth. "Samuel," she said, "my son." When he took sick, the doctor in Elk Creek, Dr. Alderton, told me to take him to Cheyenne, said there was a new medicine, a treatment. I did not go. West was still, not because I did not want to, because I did not have $12 for the stagecoach, $8 for the doctor, or a horse strong enough to make 60 miles in winter. Her voice was steady. She had said these words to herself so many times they had lost their power to make her cry. They just sat in her chest like cold stones. "If Geneva finds Dr. Alderton, he will tell the court I had a chance to save my son, and I let it pass. He will say I was told to go, and I did not go. And the court will hear a mother who failed her child. That is the weapon they will use against me." West looked at her for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, a horse stamped in the corral. "You did not fail your child," he said. "You did not have the means." "Courts do not always know the difference," Clara said. She stood up. She was tired, not the tiredness of the body, the tiredness of carrying something heavy for a very long time without anyone to share the weight. That night, after the house was dark, Clara sat at Bertie's kitchen table and wrote a letter. "Dear Dr. Alderton, if anyone asks you about my son, tell them the truth. All of it. Whatever you remember, whatever you said to me, whatever I said to you, tell the whole truth, because the whole truth is all I have, and it will have to be enough. Sincerely, Clara Bellwether." She sealed the letter and gave it to Jack Mercer at first light. He rode out without questions because Jack was that kind of man, the kind who did what was needed and asked about it later. Clara watched him go from the porch. The sun was just coming up over the mountains, painting the snow pink and gold. It was beautiful. It was the kind of morning that made you believe the world was not as cruel as you knew it to be. She went inside and started making breakfast. Some fights you bring to the ground yourself. Geneva Hargrove came to the ranch a second time. She did not bring lawyers. She brought something more dangerous, the truth. Clara was alone on the porch when the rider appeared on the south road. West was out with Gus checking the cattle. Birdie was upstairs with Lottie. The ranch hands were scattered across the property, mending fences, breaking ice on the water troughs, doing the 1,000 small tasks that kept a 25,000-acre operation from falling apart. Geneva rode a tall gray mare and sat her saddle like a woman who had been taught to ride by someone who cared more about posture than speed. She wore black. She always wore black, Clara had learned. 2 years of mourning for a sister she could not stop losing. She dismounted at the gate and walked to the porch with her back straight and her chin level and her gloved hands folded in front of her. She looked exactly like what she was. A wealthy, educated, powerful woman who had come to deliver a message. "Mrs. Bellwether," she said, "I would like to speak with you privately." Clara could have said no. She could have gone inside and locked the door and waited for West to return. That would have been the safe play, the careful play. Clara had never been much good at careful. She sat down on the porch steps. Geneva stood in the yard. The difference in their positions was not lost on either of them. Clara above, at home, seated. Geneva below, a visitor standing. Small advantages. Clara took them where she could find them. "Say your piece," Clara said. Geneva did not attack her appearance. She did not comment on Clara's size or her clothes or her station. That surprised Clara. It also made her wary because a snake that changes its approach is more dangerous than one that keeps striking the same way. "Mrs. Bellwether," Geneva said, "I know about Samuel." Clara's hands went still in her lap. "I know Dr. Alderton told you to take him to Cheyenne. I know you did not go. I know your son died in that cabin on the mountain, on the same bed where Mr. Calloway lay when you found him." Clara said nothing. The cold seeped through her dress and into her bones, but she did not move. "I am not telling you this to cause pain," Geneva continued. Her voice had changed. "Adnumtid." Softer now, the sharp edges filed down, almost gentle. "I am telling you because I need you to understand something." She paused. Something moved behind her eyes. Something real. "I lost my sister on this ranch. For the same reason. Too far from help. Too late for saving. Rosemary was 3 hours from a doctor when she started bleeding. 3 hours. By the time a rider reached Ridgewood, she was already gone." Geneva's voice did not crack, but it thinned, like wire being drawn too tight. "I begged her to move to town. I begged her for years. She would not leave because he would not leave. He loved this land more than he loved her safety, and she loved him more than she loved her own life. And now she is dead, and the baby is dead, and all that is left is a little girl who does not speak, and a man who still will not leave this ranch." Geneva looked at Clara directly. Eye to eye. "You and I are more alike than you think, Mrs. Bellwether. We both lost someone we loved because a stubborn man chose his land over his family. Do not let Charlotte be the next one." Clara sat on the porch steps and felt the words hit her one at a time, each one finding a different place to land. Some of them bounced off the armor she had spent 2 years building. Some of them did not. The ones that did not bounce were the ones about Samuel. Because Geneva was saying the thing Clara said to herself every night. The thing she whispered into the dark when the cabin was cold, and the grief was heavy, and there was nobody to hear. If I had been stronger, if I had been richer, if I had found a way, if I had tried harder, if. Geneva had found the door that Clara kept locked, and she had walked right through it. Geneva left without another word. She mounted her gray mare and rode away down the south road, and she did not look back. Clara sat on the porch steps and could not stand up, not because her legs were weak, because everything else was. The armor had cracked. The wall she had built around the part of herself that believed she had failed Samuel, the part that she kept sealed and buried and locked behind iron doors, was open now. Geneva had picked the lock with 5 words. Too far, too late, too little. Clara looked at her hands. Big hands. Strong hands. Hands that could swing a forge hammer and shoe a horse, and drag a 200-pound man through a blizzard. Hands that had held a 4-year-old boy while a fever ate him alive and could not do a single thing to stop it. These hands, Clara thought. These hands can carry a stranger through the snow, but they could not keep my son alive. She pressed her palms against the porch boards and breathed. In and out, in and out. The cold air burned her lungs and she let it. Footsteps, not West's. Too light, too quick. Lottie appeared at the corner of the porch. She was wearing a wool dress and boots that were too big for her, and her hair was a mess, and she had charcoal on her fingers from drawing. She looked at Clara the way she always looked at Clara, with those blue eyes that saw everything and said nothing. Then she sat down beside her, not touching, just there, close enough that Clara could feel the warmth of her small body, close enough that the girl's shoulder almost brushed her arm. They sat in silence for a long time. The kind of silence that is not empty. The kind that is full of all the things two people understand without having to name them. Then Lottie spoke. It was the longest thing she had said since her mother died. Each word came slow and deliberate, pulled up from somewhere deep, like she had been thinking about it for a very long time, and was only now finding the strength to let it out. Mama dying was not Papa's fault. Samuel dying was not your fault. Aunt Geneva wants us to think it is our fault, because when we think it is our fault, we let her tell us what to do. Clara turned and looked at this child. This 7-year-old girl who had been silent for 22 months and was now speaking truth with the precision of a woman 3 times her age, who had watched her mother die and her father break and her world collapse and had retreated into silence not because she was damaged but because she was thinking, processing, waiting until she had something worth saying. Clara reached over and took Lottie's hand. The small fingers curled around hers, warm and firm. "How long have you been wanting to say that?" Clara asked. "A long time. You were waiting." Lottie nodded. "For somebody who would hear it right." They sat together on the porch in the thin winter sunshine, the big woman and the small girl, and something shifted between them. Not a beginning. They were past beginnings. A deepening. The kind that happens when 2 people stop protecting themselves and start protecting each other instead. That afternoon, Noah Finch arrived. He rode in on a swayback roan that looked like it had been borrowed from someone who did not much care for it. He was young, 30 at most, with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers, and a leather satchel that bulged with papers. His suit had been pressed at some point, but that point was not recent. He shook Clara's hand and held on a second too long, studying her face the way a man studies a map when he is trying to memorize the terrain. "You are the one who walked 15 miles, he said. "I am the one." "Good. That is going to matter tomorrow." He turned to West, who had returned from the cattle and was standing in the study with his arms crossed and the look on his face that meant he was bracing for something. "We need to talk," Finch said. "All of us. Right now." He spread his papers across the desk and gave them the news. Geneva had succeeded in replacing the judge. The original Judge 1 had been exposed for taking money from Geneva's husband over a period of 10 years. Finch himself had filed the motion to recuse. It was the right thing to do legally. But it left them with a new judge, and the new judge was a problem. His name was Harlan Creed, former frontier circuit rider. Honest as a nail, unbuyable. But he carried a bias that was worse than corruption because you could not fight it with evidence. Creed believed deeply and sincerely that children belonged with mothers. Women provided stability, warmth, moral guidance. Men provided income. That was the order of the world, and Creed had spent 30 years on the bench reinforcing it. "The problem," Finch said, leaning forward, "is that Clara is not Lottie's mother. She has no legal standing, no blood relation, no marriage. In Creed's eyes, Geneva is a woman, a blood relative, wealthy, educated, the maternal aunt. She checks every box Creed cares about. And me, Clara said. Finch looked at her. You are a stranger, an unmarried woman with no resources and no legal connection to the child. Creed will look at you, and he will see someone who does not belong. Clara sat in the leather chair and felt the words settle over her like a blanket she had worn her whole life. Does not belong. She had heard it in every form. Too big, too rough, too poor, too much, not enough. What do you need me to do, she asked. Tell the truth. Finch said it simply. The way people say simple things that are actually the hardest things in the world. Every detail, what you saw, what you did, how you found them, how you carried them. Do not embellish. Do not perform. Just tell it plain, like you are reading from a ledger, and when their lawyer comes after me, he will come after you hard. His name is Marcus Penfield. He has never lost a custody case in this territory. He will attack your character, your motives, your past. He will try to make you angry because angry witnesses make mistakes. I do not make mistakes when I'm angry, Clara said. I make them when I am scared. Finch studied her. Then do not be scared. Easy for you to say. No, it is not. I am terrified. He said it plain and honest, and Clara liked him better for it. That night, Clara lay awake past midnight. Not because of the hearing, because Finch's question had unlocked a thought she had not allowed herself to think. If she wanted to protect Lottie under the law, she needed legal standing, and there was only one way to get it. She stared down the dark hallway toward West's room and knew, with the brutal clarity that comes at 3 in the morning when all the lies you tell yourself have gone to sleep, that if she walked down that hall with that proposition, she would never know whether West said yes because of her or because of the court. She did not walk down the hall. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle and the fire tick and Lottie breathing in the next room. And she made her decision. If the court needed her to be a wife to believe her words, then the court did not deserve her words. She would walk into that courtroom as Clara Bellwether, widow, blacksmith, nobody's wife, nobody's anything except the woman who dragged a man through a blizzard because it was the right thing to do. That would have to be enough. Clara Bellwether walked into the Ridgewood courthouse wearing Birdie's navy blue dress with her hair braided and pinned, and a child's charcoal drawing folded inside the breast pocket of Henry's coat. She wore the coat over the dress because she was done pretending to be something she was not. She had not married West. She had decided that at 3 in the morning. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building at the end of Ridgewood's main street. Columns out front trying to look federal and mostly looking cold. Inside it smelled of old wood and lamp oil and the stale air of a room where other people's lives got decided by strangers in black robes. The gallery was already full. Ranch hands from the Double C took up one side, 25 men in clean shirts and pressed trousers, uncomfortable with their collars buttoned but present and accounted for. On the other side, Geneva's people, well-dressed women with tight mouths, men in suits that cost more than Clara earned in a year, Judge Hargrove's friends, Geneva's network, the machinery of money and influence assembled in neat rows. Geneva sat at the front, center of her side, wearing black head to toe. She looked like a portrait, still and composed and perfectly arranged. Beside her sat Marcus Penfield, silver-haired, tailored. His voice, when he spoke to his assistant, was smooth and warm, the kind of voice that put people at ease right before it cut them open. On the other side, West sat with Finch. West was in a dark suit, clean-shaven, his jaw set with the particular tension of a man who is holding himself together through sheer force of will. Lottie sat between Birdie and Gus in the front row, wearing a white dress, her hair brushed until it shone. She was holding a piece of paper against her chest, a drawing. She had finished it last night and would not let anyone see it. Judge Harlan Creed entered through the side door. He was smaller than Clara expected. Gray, leather-faced. Eyes like a hawk. that had been watching the same valley for 30 years. He sat down without ceremony and looked at the courtroom with an expression that said he had seen everything people could do to each other and was not impressed. "This hearing will come to order," the bailiff announced. "The matter of Geneva Tate Hargrove versus Weston James Calloway. Petition for custody of minor child Charlotte Rose Calloway." Creed settled into his chair. "Mr. Penfield, proceed." Penfield stood. He commanded the room from his first word, the way a preacher commands a congregation or a general commands a battlefield, not with volume, with certainty. "Your Honor," he said. 3 weeks ago, Weston Calloway took his 7-year-old daughter into the Wyoming wilderness during the worst blizzard in a decade. His horse fell. He was rendered unconscious. His child was left alone in a killing storm with no food, no shelter, and no adult protection. He paused. Let the words breathe. That child survived by the grace of God and the intervention of a stranger. Since that incident, Mr. Calloway has installed this stranger, an unmarried woman of no means and no legal connection, in his home as a surrogate caretaker for his daughter. He turned to face the gallery. "My client, Mrs. Hargrove, is Charlotte's closest living female relative. She offers stability, education, resources, and the kind of proper upbringing every child deserves. She asks only what any loving aunt would ask: the chance to protect her niece from a father whose grief and recklessness have put that child in mortal danger." He sat down. The courtroom murmured. "Mr. Finch," Creed said. Finch stood. His suit was wrinkled. His spectacles were smudged. He looked like a school teacher who had wandered into the wrong building, but when he spoke, his voice was clear and sharp as a struck bell. "Your Honor, Mr. Penfield tells a powerful story. But it is not the whole story. Weston Calloway did not take his daughter into danger carelessly. He took her to visit her mother's grave on the anniversary of Rosemary Calloway's death, a journey they make every year. An unpredictable storm struck. His horse fell. He was injured." Finch stepped forward. "But here are the facts Mr. Penfield did not mention. When Weston Calloway was injured, his first act was to remove his own coat and wrap it around his daughter. He gave her his food, his water. He strapped her to the saddle to keep her safe, and then lost consciousness from a wound that should have killed him. His daughter, 7 years old, got him on that horse and rode through the storm until she found help. That is not the story of a reckless father. That is the story of a man who would die for his child. And the woman who saved them is not an opportunist. She is a widow who gave 2 strangers her last food, her last firewood, her last warmth. And then she walked 15 miles through waist-deep snow to bring them home." Finch turned to the judge. "She is here today to tell this court exactly what she saw." "Call your witness," Creed said. "I call Mrs. Clara Bellwether." Clara stood. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. She walked to the witness box, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The courtroom looked back at her. Rows of faces, Geneva's cold stare, West's desperate hope. Lottie's small, pale face in the front row, gripping Bertie's hand. "Mrs. Bellwether," Finch began gently. "Tell the court how you met Weston Calloway and his daughter." Clara took a breath. She did not look at her hands. She did not look at the floor. She looked at the judge. "I heard a horse dying in a blizzard," she said. "I went outside and found the animal down with a broken leg. There was a child strapped to the saddle. She was not moving. Behind them, the father was face down in the snow, crawling toward his daughter with a coat in his hand. His coat. He had taken it off and was trying to get it to her." "What did you do?" "I cut the girl free, carried her inside, went back for the man, dragged him 30 yards through chest-deep snow to my cabin. You dragged him. He was unconscious and twice my weight. Dragging was the only option." A murmur from the gallery. Creed's expression did not change. What happened next? "I warmed them, fed them, treated his head wound, Gave them my food, my firewood, my bed. When the storm broke 3 days later, I strapped on snowshoes and walked them home. 15 miles. Why? Because they would have died otherwise. Finch nodded. In those 3 days, what did you observe about Mr. Calloway as a father? Clara looked at West. He sat rigid, knuckles white. I observed a man who woke from unconsciousness and the first word out of his mouth was his daughter's name. I observed a man who gave his child every bite of food before he would eat. I observed a man who held his daughter while she cried and told her that crying was not weakness. She paused. I have known Weston Calloway for 12 days. In those 12 days, I have never seen him put anything before that child. Not comfort, not pride, not his own life. Thank you, Mrs. Bellwether. Finch sat down. Penfield stood. His smile was the kind that did not reach his eyes. Polished, professional. The smile of a man who was about to do something unpleasant and wanted you to believe it was nothing personal. Mrs. Bellwether, he said. On or about February 14th, 1881. Did Dr. James Alderton of Elk Creek advise you to transport your son Samuel to St. Joseph's Hospital in Cheyenne for treatment? Clara felt the blow coming before it landed. She had known it was coming. She had prepared for it. She had written the letter to Alderton and carried the hospital's reply in her pocket for 2 years. But knowing a thing is coming does not mean it does not hurt when it arrives. He did, Clara said. Did you transport your son to Cheyenne? I did not. Why not? Because I did not have $12 for the stagecoach, $8 for the doctor in Cheyenne, or a horse strong enough to make 60 miles in January. Did you seek help? From neighbors? From the church? I asked Pastor Harlan. He said he would pray for us. I asked the general store for credit. They said I already owed too much. I asked my nearest neighbor, Tom Bixby. He said he had troubles of his own. Penfield nodded. His face was arranged in an expression of sympathy that was worse than cruelty because it was convincing. So your son died because you lacked the resources to save him. Is that a fair summary, Mrs. Bellwether? The courtroom drew a sharp, collective breath. Birdie grabbed the bench rail. West half rose from his chair. Finch was on his feet, objecting. Creed sustained the objection, but the words were in the air. They hung there like smoke, and everyone in the room had breathed them in. Clara's hands were shaking. She gripped the rail of the witness box and held on. The old wound was open, bleeding in front of strangers. The deepest and most private pain of her life, spread out for a courtroom full of people who had never held a dying child. She could feel Geneva watching from across the aisle. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room, the pity, the judgment, the assessment. Your Honor, Clara said. Her voice cracked, and she let it. May I add something? Creed looked at her. Go ahead. Clara reached into the breast pocket of Henry's coat and took out a letter. Yellowed, folded small, the creases soft from handling. She had carried it every day for 2 years, transferring it each morning from pocket to pocket, coat to dress to coat again. It had become a part of her the way the grief had. Something she carried not because it brought comfort, but because putting it down felt like forgetting. After Samuel died, she said, I wrote to St. Joseph's Hospital in Cheyenne. I wanted to know about the medicine Dr. Alderton had mentioned, the treatment he said they had. She unfolded the letter. Her hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. Something had shifted inside her. The way iron shifts when you heat it past the point of resistance and it becomes something you can shape. The hospital replied 6 weeks later. They said they had no new treatment for diphtheria. The medicine Dr. Alderton described did not exist. It was never real. Even if I had found the money, even if I had made the journey, even if I had done everything differently, the result would have been the same. The courtroom was absolutely still. My son did not die because I was poor. My son died because he was sick with a disease that no one in the Wyoming Territory or anywhere else could cure in 1881. I have carried this letter in my coat pocket for 2 years. Not because it comforts me, because I need to remind myself every single morning that I did everything I could. She looked at Penfield. He was standing very still, his polished expression frozen. "And I will do everything I can for this child, too," Clara said. Penfield opened his mouth, closed it, straightened his jacket. "No further questions," he said. "You may step down, Mrs. Bellwether," Creed said. Clara walked back to her seat. Her legs were water. West reached for her hand as she sat down, and she let him take it. His grip was warm and fierce, and she held on like it was the only solid thing in a room that had turned to smoke. Finch leaned over. "That was everything," he whispered. It did not feel like everything. It felt like being turned inside out in front of 100 strangers. "The best testimony never does," Finch said. Judge Creed looked at his papers. Then he looked at the front row. "I will hear from the child," he said. Lottie stood up. She was holding her drawing against her chest like a shield. Bertie tried to smooth her hair. Lottie ducked away. She walked to the witness box alone, chin up, shoulders back. She climbed onto the chair and looked at the judge. The judge looked at her. "Hello, Charlotte. Hello, sir. Everyone calls me Lottie." "Lottie, then. Do you know why you are here? Because Aunt Geneva wants to take me away from Papa. Your aunt says she wants what is best for you." Lottie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She wants what is best for her." Murmurs from the gallery. Geneva stiffened. "Tell me about your father," Creed said. "He is the best papa in the world. He works hard and he takes care of me and he reads to me at night. When the horse fell and he hit his head, he took off his coat and gave it to me, even though he was bleeding. He tied me to the saddle so I would not fall. He took care of me even when he could not take care of himself. And Mrs. Bellwether?" Lottie looked at Clara. A smile broke across her small face like sunrise over a mountain. "Clara saved us. She carried me inside and dragged Papa through the snow and gave us all her food. She did not know us, and she gave us everything." Creed leaned forward slightly. "What would you like, Charlotte?" "If you could choose. I want to live with Papa, and I want Clara to stay." "Why?" Lottie held up her drawing. The courtroom craned to see. Charcoal on paper. 4 figures, 3 on the ground, 1 in the sky. The 3 on the ground were a large woman, a tall man, and a small girl. The one in the sky was smaller, lighter, drawn with softer lines. Watching. Beneath the drawing, in Lottie's careful print, 3 words. "She saved us." "Because she is strong," Lottie said. "She is the strongest person I ever met. She is not scared of the snow, and she is not scared of Aunt Geneva, and she is not scared of being alone." Lottie's voice caught. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and kept going. "When Mama died, I thought nobody would ever make me feel safe again. But Clara does. She does not sing like Mama, and she does not look like Mama, and she is not Mama. She is Clara, and Clara is who I need." The courtroom was silent. Clara could not see through her tears. Lottie climbed down from the witness box and walked back to her seat. Past Geneva, whose face was white and frozen. Past the gallery of strangers and neighbors. She walked straight to Clara and climbed into her lap and put her arms around her neck and held on. Clara held her back, in front of the judge and the lawyers and Geneva and the whole town. She held this child who was not hers by blood or law or anything except choice. Judge Creed sat very still. He looked at the drawing on the evidence table. He looked at it for a long time. Then he raised his head and looked directly at Geneva Hargrove. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, "I have a question for you, not as the petitioner, as this child's aunt." Geneva stood, spine straight, face white. "When was the last time you heard your niece speak?" Geneva Hargrove opened her mouth to answer the judge, then closed it, opened it again. For the first time in Clara's memory, the woman who always had the perfect word at the perfect moment had nothing. The clock on the courtroom wall ticked. The gallery held its breath. Penfield sat motionless in his chair. Mrs. Hargrove, Creed repeated. When was the last time you heard Charlotte speak? At Rosemary's funeral, Geneva said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. 22 months ago. Were you aware that your niece stopped speaking after that day? I knew there were difficulties. I was told she had become withdrawn. Creed's eyes were steady. How many times have you visited Charlotte since the funeral? Silence. The kind that fills a room the way water fills a basin, rising from the floor, covering everything. I sent gifts, Geneva said. Her hands were folded in her lap and they were shaking. I wrote letters. I arranged for... How many times did you visit Mrs. Hargrove? The silence lasted 5 seconds. 10. An eternity in a courtroom. None, Geneva said, until I filed the petition. The room did not erupt. It did the opposite. It went so quiet that Clara could hear the wind outside the courthouse walls and the creak of the wooden bench under Gus McAllister's weight and the soft, steady breathing of the child in her lap. You are petitioning this court, Creed said, for custody of a child you did not visit for 22 months. A child who stopped speaking, and you did not know. A child whose voice you have not heard since her mother's burial. He removed his spectacles, cleaned them on his robe, put them back on. Is that correct? Yes, Geneva said. Why? The question hung in the air. Simple. 4 letters. The most dangerous word in any courtroom. Geneva looked at her hands. At the daguerreotype that was not here but that Clara knew she carried in her mind everywhere she went. At the ghost of her sister, who had died on a ranch too far from help. I did not visit, Geneva said, because every time I look at Charlotte, I see Rosemary, and I cannot bear it. The courtroom was still. She looks like her, Geneva continued. Her voice had lost its polish. Underneath was something raw and bleeding. The same eyes, the same mouth, the same way of tilting her head when she is thinking. Every time I see Charlotte, I see my sister dying on that bed. And I cannot. She stopped. Her jaw clenched. One tear tracked down her powdered cheek onto her white glove. I made a promise, she whispered. Rosemary asked me to take care of her daughter. It was the last thing she said. And I have failed. I have failed because I was too much of a coward to look at my sister's face in my niece's eyes. So I sent money instead. I sent gifts. I sent lawyers, because those were things I could send without having to see. She raised her eyes to the judge. I am not a good woman, Judge Creed. I have done things in this case that I am not proud of. I hired a man to dig into Mrs. Bellwether's past because I thought if I could prove she was unfit, then taking Charlotte would be justified. I was wrong. The courtroom breathed. But I made a promise to my sister, and I do not know how to stop keeping it, even badly, even wrong. I do not know how to let her go. Clara sat in the witness gallery with Lottie in her lap and watched Geneva Hargrove come apart. Not dramatically. Not the way villains break in stories. Slowly, quietly. The way a person breaks when they have been carrying something too heavy for too long and their arms finally give out. And Clara recognized it. The same species of grief she carried. The same desperate clinging to a promise that was never going to bring back the dead. She had set a bowl for Samuel every morning for 2 years because stopping meant admitting he was gone. Geneva had filed lawsuits for the same reason. Different method, same wound. Clara did not hate her. She should have. This woman had tried to destroy her in court, had hired a man to excavate her worst pain, had used the death of Clara's son as a weapon. But sitting there in the courtroom watching Geneva's careful mask dissolve into the face of a grieving sister who had nowhere left to put her love, Clara could not find the hate. Only the recognition. The terrible, honest recognition of one broken woman looking at another. Judge Creed was quiet for a long time. He looked at the drawing on the evidence table. He looked at Lottie, asleep now in Clara's arms, worn out from the effort of speaking more words in one day than she had spoken in 22 months. He looked at West, who was gripping the arm of his chair so hard the wood was creaking. He looked at Geneva, sitting alone on her side of the courtroom with her tear-stained glove and her black dress and her broken promise. Then he spoke. The petition for custody is denied. Charlotte Rose Calloway will remain with her father. This ruling is permanent. The gallery exhaled. Gus made a sound in the back of his throat. Bertie pressed both hands to her mouth. West dropped his head forward and his shoulders shook. However, Creed continued, I want to say something to both parties that is not part of my ruling, but which I believe needs to be said. He looked at Geneva. Mrs. Hargrove, love that does not show up is not love. It is an idea. Ideas do not raise children. You made a promise to your sister. I believe that promise was real. But you have been keeping it wrong. He looked at West. Mr. Calloway, this child needs to know her mother, and Mrs. Hargrove is the keeper of that story. Do not waste that resource out of anger. He looked at Clara. Mrs. Bellwether, I have sat on this bench for 30 years. I have heard thousands of witnesses. I have never heard testimony like yours, not because of what you said, but because of what you did not need to say. The truth was already in the room before you opened your mouth. That child in your arms put it there. He picked up his gavel. Additionally, Mrs. Hargrove, you are hereby ordered to make no approach to the Calloway property or contact with Charlotte without written permission from her father. Violation will result in contempt charges and confinement at the county jail. He looked at the back of the courtroom where Silas Drummond sat with his narrow face and his city coat. Mr. Drummond, if this court learns that you have manufactured or falsified evidence in this territory, you will answer to a grand jury, and you will answer from inside the territorial penitentiary. Are we understood? Drummond nodded once. Creed banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. The room erupted. Gus shouted something in Scottish that nobody understood. Bertie cried. The ranch hands cheered. West's head dropped, and he did not lift it for a long time. Clara sat still. Lottie was warm and heavy in her arms, still sleeping, dreaming whatever children dream when they have finally been told they are safe. Outside the courthouse, the sun was low and the air was cold and the steps were crowded with people. Clara carried Lottie out and stood in the thin light and breathed. Geneva was on the steps, alone. Penfield and her retinue had gone. She stood with her back to the courthouse, looking out at the snow-covered road, and she looked smaller than Clara had ever seen her. Clara walked over and stood beside her, not close, not far, just there. Will you take care of her, Geneva said without turning. You already know the answer. I need to hear you say it. I will take care of her. Geneva nodded. She took a step toward the road, then stopped. Rosemary's favorite flowers were violets. Charlotte does not know that. I would like to be the one to tell her. Clara looked at this woman. This enemy. This grieving sister. This person who had tried to take everything from her and was now asking for permission to give something instead. Then come tell her, Clara said. You do not need a lawyer for that. Just knock on the door. Geneva walked away. She did not look back, but her back was not as straight as it had been when she walked in. It curved just slightly, like a woman who had set down something very heavy that she had carried for much too long. West was behind Clara. She did not know how long he had been there. He did not speak. He just placed his hand on her shoulder. Light, not possessive, not demanding, just there. Clara reached up and put her hand over his. They stood like that on the courthouse steps in the thin December sun, until Lottie woke up and asked if they could please go home now because Bertie had promised apple pie and she was starving. Clara went back to the cabin one last time, not to stay, to say goodbye the right way, to Henry, to Samuel, to the woman she used to be when she believed that being strong meant suffering alone. She rode alone. West offered to come. Clara said, some places you have to walk into by yourself. You will understand when. The trail up the mountain was hard going, snow still deep in the shadows, the trees quiet and close. She rode Henry's favorite route, the one that followed the creek bed up through the pines, the one he had taken every morning to check the fence line and every evening to come home. The cabin was smaller than she remembered, smaller and sadder, hunched under its load of snow, chimney cold, windows dark. The door was still locked. She turned the key and pushed it open and stood on the threshold and let the cold air of the empty room wash over her. Everything was where she had left it, the forge tools on the wall, the rifle rack by the door, the bed where she had nursed West and warmed Lottie and held a dying child years before that, the fireplace black and cold, and on the table, the bowl, Samuel's bowl, the one she had set every morning for 2 years. Dried cornmeal mush, crusted and cracked and covered in a fine fur of mold. The spoon beside it was tarnished. The napkin she had folded next to it was stiff with age. Clara picked up the bowl, held it in both hands, felt its weight. Not the weight of clay, the weight of ritual, of grief performed so faithfully and for so long, that it had become a wall, and the wall had become a prison, and the prison had become the only home she knew. She carried the bowl outside, washed it clean with handfuls of snow, scrubbing the mold and the crust away until the clay was bare and smooth. She dried it with her coat sleeve, wrapped it in cloth, packed it in her saddlebag. Not to set on another table. To keep, to remember, but not to worship. She went back inside and gathered what mattered. Henry's forge tools, heavy and true, the handles worn to the shape of his hands that had become the shape of hers. Samuel's baby blanket, folded small and tight, still smelling of cedar. The letter from St. Joseph's Hospital. The tin cup she had shared with a bleeding stranger on the worst night of her life. She left the rest. The table, the chairs, the bed, the ghosts. At the door she stopped, turned back, looked at the cabin one last time. The single room where she had been a wife and a mother and a widow and a woman alone. The room where she had heard a horse dying in the dark and made the choice to open the door. "Thank you," she said, to the empty room, to Henry, to Samuel, to the version of herself who had lived here, the one who kept the fire burning when there was no reason to keep burning anything, the one who set a bowl for the dead and cleaned a rifle for the living and swung a hammer alone in the dark because stopping meant the silence would win. Thank you for keeping me alive long enough to find something to live for. She closed the door. She did not lock it. She left it open for whoever might need shelter in the next storm. Because that was what you did in this country. You left doors open, you left firewood stacked, you left a chance for the next person who came stumbling out of the white. She mounted up and rode south. Toward the ranch, toward the lights, toward the sound of a 7-year-old girl's voice carrying across the snow. Spring came the way it always comes to Wyoming. Slow and grudging, and then all at once. The snow melted. The creeks ran high and fast and muddy. The pastures turned green overnight, or what felt like overnight, and the cattle that had huddled together for warmth through the long winters spread out across the land, like they had never heard of cold. Clara stood on the ranch house porch in the early morning, coffee in hand, Henry's coat over her shoulders because she still liked the weight of it. The sun was coming up over the mountains, and the light was gold, and the air smelled like wet grass and pine and possibility. She looked at her hand. On the fourth finger, a ring. Simple. Silver? She had forged it herself on the ranch smithy, hammering the metal into a band while Gus held the tongs, and Birdie offered unsolicited opinions about the width. West wore a matching one. She had forged that too. On the inside of each ring, she had stamped 3 letters, L-O-T, for Lottie, because the child was the reason the rings existed. She did not remember the wedding in detail, and that was fine. It had been small, Birdie and Gus as witnesses, the circuit preacher from Ridgewood standing by the fireplace, Lottie between them, holding a sprig of winter holly. Clara had spoken her vows in a voice that cracked once and did not crack again. West had spoken his, looking straight at her. What mattered was not the ceremony. What mattered was this: the porch, the coffee, the ring, the morning. The door burst open behind her. Clara. The foal came. The spotted mare had her baby. Come see, come now. Lottie was half-dressed, boots unlaced, hair everywhere, charcoal smudged on her cheek from drawing. She grabbed Clara's free hand and pulled. Clara set down her coffee and followed. Lottie talked the entire way to the barn. Full sentences, complete thoughts, questions and observations and opinions delivered at a speed and volume that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. She talked about the foal and the weather, and whether Gus was going to yell, and whether Bertie's biscuits would be ready before or after they saw the baby horse. She talked. She talked the way rivers run in spring, fast and full and unstoppable, making up for all the months of silence with a flood of words that filled every corner of the morning. The barn was warm and bright and full of men. Ranch hands leaned against the stall rails, hats pushed back, grinning. Jack Mercer stood closest, his arms folded, nodding slowly the way he did when something met his approval. "Filly," Jack said. "Strong one, too," Jack said. Came right out fighting. In the stall, the foal stood on legs that did not quite work yet, wobbling, stumbling, catching itself. Spotted brown and white, with a blaze on its forehead and eyes that were enormous and dark and full of the bewildered wonder of a creature that had just discovered the world existed. The mare stood beside it, nudging it gently, guiding it with her nose. "Can I name her?" Lottie said. She was climbing the stall door already. "She is your horse," West said. He appeared beside Clara, sliding his arm around her waist. "Pick a good name," Lottie thought. Her brow furrowed, her lips moved silently, trying out words, discarding them, trying more. The ranch hands waited. West waited. Clara waited. "Blizzard," Lottie said, "because the best things come out of storms." Clara laughed. She felt West's arm tighten around her. She felt the warmth of the barn and the smell of hay and new life, and the sound of men laughing and a child naming her first horse. On the barn wall, in a rough wooden frame that Gus had built from scrap lumber, hung a charcoal drawing. 4 figures, 3 on the ground, 1 in the sky. Beneath it, in Lottie's hand, the original words had been amended. A new line added below the first. "She saved us. Then we saved her." That afternoon, Clara was in her forge. The old tool shed that West had converted for her in February, building a proper chimney, setting the anvil, hanging the tools. Her tools now. Henry's hammer, Henry's tongs, her anvil, her fire. She was making a door hinge, the same task she had been doing the night she heard the horse fall. Iron heated to orange, laid on the anvil, shaped under the hammer. Strike, turn, strike. The rhythm as old as metalwork itself. Small footsteps on the packed dirt floor. Lottie appeared with a cup of water and climbed onto the stool by the workbench. She sat with her legs swinging, watching Clara work with the focused attention she gave to everything, taking it in, learning it, filing it away in whatever vast, quiet library lived behind those blue eyes. "Clara, can you teach me to forge? I can teach you anything. Even swords?" "Even swords." Lottie grinned. Clara grinned. The hammer fell. Sparks flew, bright and brief, rising into the darkness of the forge roof like tiny orange stars. Clara glanced at the nail by the forge door. Henry's coat hung there. Not on her shoulders anymore, but still close. Still part of the room. She did not need to wear it to remember. She just needed to know it was there. Through the open forge door, she could see the ranch spreading out under the afternoon sky. Cattle in the pastures, horses in the corrals. Gus shouting at somebody in words that were half English and half Scottish and half fury. Bertie hanging laundry on the line, singing. Jack Mercer riding out toward the south fence with 2 hands behind him. And West on the porch, hat tilted back, coffee in hand. Watching her the way he had been watching her since the first morning he woke in her cabin and found his silent daughter leaning against a stranger's shoulder. He tipped his hat to her across the yard. She lifted her hammer in answer, held it up just for a second, the way you raise a glass or a hand or a flag, a salute, an acknowledgement, a promise kept. Then she turned back to the anvil. The iron was waiting. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And Clara Bellwether Calloway, who had once been nobody from nowhere with nothing, did not mind one bit. She swung the hammer. The iron sang. Sparks rose and scattered. And outside the forge, the world went on. The sun moved across the sky. The wind carried the smell of grass and horses, and the distant sound of a child laughing somewhere in the barn. Not because someone had told her she was enough, because she always had been. She just needed a dying horse, a silent child, and the courage to open the door. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.